For thousands of years, codes and ciphers have been used during conflict and war, and for almost as long, there have been code breakers. Many of us are familiar with that scene in A Christmas Story where Ralphie gets his decoder ring. As comedic as that scene is, there is a history of armies using cipher disks to encrypt their messages. Cipher disks can help armies easily create codes, and the downside is that they're easier to break. Then twice in the early 20th century, the world went to war. There was a need to ensure messages were even harder to decipher. American Indians stepped up to serve. During both wars, hundreds enlisted. Using their native languages, they helped the United States win the war. When we look back at the history of New Mexico, our indigenous people have always been brave defenders of their homes. These are people who were forced off of their lands, who have faced extreme racism and have had to push against a nation trying to erase their culture. Despite this, in both world wars, American Indians signed up to defend their home, the United States. It is their history, their culture, and their fight to still speak their own languages that helped win World War II. Using these languages, many American Indians were assigned to communication roles where they could send coded messages about critical military information. These brave veterans came to be known as code talkers. Chester Nez, a New Mexico native, was one of these brave code talkers. His childhood highlights the complicated history of American Indians. He was raised during a time when there were difficult relations between the U.S. government and the Navajo Nation. Nez recalled children often being taken from reservations, sent to boarding schools, and told not to speak the Navajo language. At 8 years old, Nez was sent to a school run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was here he was assigned the English name Chester. While Nez was at a government-run boarding school in Tuba City, Arizona, the Marine Corps recruited him to serve as a code talker. Nez kept his choice to enlist from his family and lied about his age so that he could meet the enlistment requirements. He and 28 other Navajo formed Recruit Training Platoon 382 at Marine Corps Base, San Diego.
This major took us into a great big room, and he said, "You guys are going to have to make up a code in your own native language." That's all he said. He left, closed the door behind him, and locked the door. We didn't know what to think, you know. We said, what does he mean by making a code in our own language, you know? We sat there for about 3 or 4 minutes, then start thinking, how are we going to develop this code?
It had been common for Indian code talkers to use their native language to translate messages directly. For example, quote, "Enemy groups moving east along the front" would be translated verbatim into a native language. This was known as Type 2 codes. Even though these were not common languages, having another level of security against code breakers is what the military was looking for, and why Nez and his fellow Navajo soldiers were asked to come up with a code using their language. The Navajo, Comanche, Hopi, and Meskwaki developed what was known as Type 1 codes. To create their code, Nez and the other 28 Navajo code talkers used words from their own language to correspond to letters in the alphabet. Knowing that they would have no cheat sheet on the battlefield, it would all have to be memorized. They picked easy to remember words.
So we started talking about different things, you know, animals, sea creatures, birds, eagles, hawks, and all those domestic animals. And why don't we use those names of different animals from A to Z? So A, we took a red ant that we live with all the time. B, we took a bear. You get a bear. C, a cat. D, a dog. E, an elk. F, fox. G, a goat. And so on down the line.
Once the code was developed, Nez and his fellow code talkers were shipped out to Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. Here they worked in teams of two, one to send and receive, the other to operate the radio and listen for errors. The work of code talkers was demanding. They had to manage all elements of the operation. The equipment was complicated. They were responsible for knowing how to use both the wire and radio equipment they often had to carry through rough terrain. Code talkers served in both the European and Pacific theater. Nez and his fellow Navajo were assigned to the Pacific. These incredibly brave men were essential to how we won the war. Nez was honorably discharged as a private first class in 1945 and returned to serve stateside in the Korean War, from which he was discharged as a corporal. The work of the Navajo code talkers was kept secret for years. It was classified information, which meant Nez was not permitted to speak of his work.
When we got out, discharge, they told us, this thing that you guys did is going to be a secret. When you get home, you don't talk what you did, tell your people, your parents, family. Don't tell them what your job was. This is going to be a secret. Don't talk about it. Just tell them that you've been in the service, defend your country and stuff like that. But the code, never. Don't mention, don't talk about it. Don't let other people try to get that out of you, what you guys did. So that was a secret for about 25 or 26 years until August the 16th, 1968. That's when it was declassified. Then it was open. I told my sister, my aunt, and all my family what I really did.
Finally, in 1968, the Navajo Code Talkers program was declassified. More than 20 years later, the world was starting to understand the role Nez and the Navajo played in winning World War II. After a very long wait, on July 26, 2001, Nez was one of the 5 living original code talkers who received the Congressional Gold Medal from President George W. Bush. Nez wrote a memoir of his experience, Code Talker, the first and only memoir by one of the original Navajo code talkers of World War II. At his passing on June 4th, 2014, Chester Nez was the last surviving of the original 29 Navajo code talkers.
You're 18 years old. You want to go and do something, man. It's exciting. This is what I wanted. Well, that's what I got. I'm happy. Came out of the war, I'm scratched, lucky to be home. That's all what's about, you know. Life is something that you have to make and enjoy. This is what's for me.